On the edge of a frozen Vermont lake, a retired Navy SEAL was taking one last road home before the storm closed in. But beside an old church, his headlights found something the snow had nearly buried. An elderly widow lay helpless near a stone fence, and an old German shepherd was pressed against her body, giving her the last warmth he had. The dog had no home, no owner, and no reason to stay except love. What Warren Pike discovered afterward was not a grand conspiracy, but something quieter and almost more painful. A town had forgotten who needed warmth most, and one stray dog remembered. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep creating meaningful stories. Warren Pike had learned, over the years, that winter did not arrive in Vermont all at once. It tested the door first. A white hand against the window, a whisper under the eaves, a thin skin of ice over the troughs and gutters. Then, when the town had grown used to its beauty, when the lake wore silver and the maples stood bare like old kings stripped of their crowns, winter lowered its shoulder and came through. By late afternoon, Lake Wren had gone quiet under that warning. The little Vermont town sat in a hollow of pale hills and frozen water, its rooftops rounded with snow, its shop windows glowing amber behind frost. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft blue ribbons. The lake itself lay sealed beneath a sheet of ice, bright in places where the wind had swept it clean, dull and white where fresh snow had gathered like flour on a baker's board. It was the kind of place tourists called peaceful because they never had to shovel its roads at 5 in the morning. Warren Pike knew better. At 52, he had the shoulders of a man who had carried too much and the silence of someone who had learned that not every burden improved by being named. He stood 6 feet tall, broad through the chest but not heavy, built more like a weathered tool than a statue. His clean-shaven face was angular, with a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a straight nose that had been broken once and set badly enough to remember. His hair was cut in a neat undercut, dark ash-brown with silver showing at the temples. The top had grown longer than regulation and swept back naturally when he ran a hand through it. His eyes, pale blue-gray, held the calm of a frozen lake, beautiful from a distance, dangerous if a man trusted the surface too quickly. He wore an olive-drab combat shirt beneath a dark winter field jacket. The shirt's torso fit close to him, its camouflage sleeves worn soft at the elbows, with faded horizontal bands at the biceps. It was not a uniform anymore. Warren did not wear uniforms. But the shirt remained, like an old language his body still understood. The storm was due before nightfall. By noon, the whole town had begun moving as if some ancient bell had rung beneath the snow. Men nailed plywood over weak windows. Women hauled boxes of blankets into the community hall. Volunteers stacked firewood beneath tarps. The elderly were checked on, generators were tested, and the homeless were brought indoors before the sky turned cruel. Warren worked without much speaking. He tightened porch rails, patched a broken window at the bakery, helped drag 2 cots into the town hall, and carried split logs into the shelter until his arms ached with a familiar, honest pain. There were worse aches. He had known them. This one at least meant something useful had been done. "Pike," June Bellamy called from the steps of the community hall. "You planning to lift every piece of wood in Lake Wren, or should I save some for the other men's pride?" June was 61, short and sturdy, with salt and pepper hair cut at her jaw and a red brick winter coat that made her visible from half a block away. She moved like a woman who had been born already late for something important. In one gloved hand, she carried a clipboard. In the other, a silver whistle hung from a cord at her neck, though Warren had never known her to need it. June's voice could stop traffic, and, on one memorable Christmas Eve, had silenced an entire church choir by accident. Warren set another armload of wood under the awning. "Other men should build stronger pride," he said. June snorted. "There he is, the poet of despair. Just practical." "No, practical would be going home before the roads vanish." Warren glanced toward the sky. The clouds had thickened into one unbroken ceiling, low and white, as if the heavens had been packed with wool. Snow already fell in fine dry grains, innocent-looking things that would become a wall by dark. Near the supply truck, Owen Lark was speaking to two volunteers with a calm smile and a polished tone. Owen managed the relief warehouse, the donation records, and the transport schedule. He was 48, trim, carefully groomed, his dark blonde hair parted neatly beneath a charcoal wool cap. Even in a storm, his coat looked too clean, his gloves too black, his boots too untouched by salt and mud. "Efficiency matters in crisis," Owen was saying, tapping a clipboard with a silver pen. "If we improvise too much, we create confusion. Confusion costs resources." June rolled her eyes, though not enough for anyone but Warren to see. "He talks like a brochure that learned to breathe," she muttered. Warren almost smiled. Dangerous species. Protected by donors, apparently. Across the hall, volunteers guided two men inside from the cold. One carried everything he owned in a plastic grocery bag. The other kept apologizing for taking up space. Warren watched them disappear into the warmth and felt something in his chest tighten, not painfully, but like a rope being tested. A man learned the shape of abandonment early if he paid attention. Sometimes it wore a dirty coat. Sometimes it wore polished shoes and used words like policy. As daylight dimmed, the work became more urgent. A plow got stuck near the north road. A furnace failed at an old duplex. Someone's roof gutter tore loose and slapped against the siding like a frantic hand. Warren went where he was pointed, fixed what he could, carried what needed carrying, and refused 3 cups of coffee before finally accepting one from Tessa Monroe at the diner window. By 6, the storm had teeth. Snow came harder, thickening the streetlights into glowing halos. The wind chased it sideways, packing it against doorways and around the wheels of parked cars. The community hall pulsed with yellow light and voices. Inside, people unfolded blankets, argued gently over cot placement, filled paper cups with soup, and pretended they were not afraid of the night outside. Warren was loading his tools into the back of his old Ford pickup when June appeared again beside him, hunched against the wind. "You heading home?" That was the rumor. "I need one last favor." He looked at her. June raised a hand before he could answer. "Don't make that face. It's not heroic. It's inconvenient. That's worse. St. Agnes." Warren turned toward the north end of town, though the church itself was hidden beyond the snow and rooftops. The old chapel of St. Agnes sat near the lake road, no longer used for regular services except small winter gatherings and the occasional funeral when someone insisted on old wood, old bells, and old ghosts. In recent weeks, a few people without permanent shelter had been sleeping under its side porch before the town moved everyone into the hall. June's mouth tightened. "I sent Arthur and 2 volunteers there earlier to check. They said it was clear. But Mabel Crane was asking about it before the weather turned. Said she thought someone still used the rear entry." "Mabel goes everywhere," Warren said. "She also notices things the rest of us step over." June glanced back at the hall. "Main road's blocked by the rescue rig. If you take the lakeside, it's on your way home. Just shine a light around. Make sure nobody's tucked behind the building. Then get to your cabin before I have to organize a rescue for your stubborn skull." Warren pulled his gloves tighter. "Your concern is moving. My concern is paperwork." He shut the truck bed. "I'll check." June nodded once, satisfied but not relieved. That was one thing Warren respected about her. June never confused action with comfort. As he climbed into the pickup, Owen's voice drifted faintly from the hall doorway behind them. "June, we need to keep the shelter intake orderly. We can't have people wandering between unofficial locations." Warren looked back. Owen stood beneath the awning, snow glittering on the shoulders of his immaculate dark coat. His expression was polite, almost patient, the expression of a man explaining gravity to children. June's face hardened. "That's why he's checking." "Of course," Owen said smoothly. "As long as we're consistent." Warren started the engine before he could say something unhelpful. The Ford rolled out of town slowly, tires grinding through packed snow. Lake Wren disappeared behind him in a blur of warm windows and white wind. The road narrowed beyond the last houses, curving along the frozen edge of the lake. Pine trees leaned over the shoulders, their branches burdened with snow. The world outside the headlights had no depth anymore, only whiteness and dark trunks sliding past like the ribs of some sleeping giant. Warren drove with both hands on the wheel. He did not mind storms. Not exactly. Storms were honest. They came howling, tore at weak things, and announced their appetite without shame. It was people who troubled him. People could abandon you in a warm room while smiling. The heater rattled. The wipers fought and lost and fought again. On the passenger seat lay a coil of rope, a flashlight, a folded thermal blanket, and the old black-faced military watch he had taken off earlier while working on the shelter furnace. He picked it up at a stop sign, half buried in snow, and rubbed his thumb once over the scratched glass before putting it back on. The habit embarrassed him when he noticed it. The watch had survived salt water, sand, blood, aircraft vibration, hospital rooms, and one night he still did not let himself remember unless sleep forced him. Touching it did not bring the past closer. It only reminded him that the present was still ticking. St. Agnes emerged from the storm like a chapel from an old folk tale. Its steeple was dark. Its small stained glass windows were black. The stone fence beside it wore thick caps of snow, each post rounded and white, like a line of monks bowing their heads. Behind the chapel, a narrow lane led toward the rear entrance, and a storage shed half swallowed by drifts. Warren slowed. His headlights swept across the side porch. Nothing. He drove another 20 feet, scanning the fence, the shed, the rear steps. Snow blurred the beam and scattered it back at him. The church bell rope thumped faintly in the wind, a hollow wooden sound like someone knocking from inside a dream. Then he saw it, a dark shape beside the stone fence. At first, Warren thought it was a tarp blown loose from the shed. The shape lay low, uneven, already half buried. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The shape moved. Not much, just enough. Warren braked hard. The truck slid a few feet before stopping. He grabbed the flashlight and thermal blanket from the seat and stepped out into the storm. The cold struck him full in the face. Snow came at him sideways. It filled the collar of his jacket, stung his eyes, and scraped across his clean-shaven jaw like powdered glass. His boots sank past the ankles, then nearly to the calf as he pushed toward the fence. "Hey!" he called. The storm swallowed his voice. The shape lifted its head. Two eyes caught the flashlight beam, amber, old, furious with fear. Warren stopped. A German shepherd lay pressed against a body in the snow. The dog was large but gaunt, its coat black and deep gold, frosted white along the spine where ice had gathered. Its muzzle was silvered with age. One ear stood sharp, the other bent slightly at the tip. The animal's body shook so violently that the snow around its ribs trembled, yet it did not move away. Beneath the dog, half covered by a torn strip of canvas, lay an elderly woman. Her gray coat was packed with snow. One gloved hand rested palm up against the frozen ground. Her face was pale, lashes crusted white, mouth slightly open. Warren saw no blood, but one leg was twisted at an angle that made his gut tighten. The dog growled. Low, broken, final. Not a threat from an animal looking to fight. A warning from a guardian with nothing left except duty. Warren slowly lowered the flashlight beam so it no longer struck the dog's eyes. He crouched, ignoring the cold biting through his pants. "I'm not here to take her from you," he said quietly. "You hear me, old man?" The dog's lips trembled over worn teeth. Its breath came in thin bursts. Warren pulled off one glove with his teeth and reached, not for the woman first, but toward the snow in front of the dog. He placed his bare hand there, palm down, letting the animal smell him if it had strength enough. The German shepherd stared. For a long moment there was only wind, snow, and the bell rope knocking against old wood. Then the dog lowered its head by 1 inch. Permission or surrender? Warren could not tell which. Maybe there was no difference when a creature had held the line too long. He moved fast after that. The woman had a pulse, faint but present. Her breathing was shallow, her skin was dangerously cold. Warren pulled the thermal blanket around her upper body, then pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of her throat again, counting, measuring, refusing panic because panic had never warmed anyone. "Stay with me," he murmured. He glanced at the dog. "Both of you." He called June first, then emergency dispatch, speaking in clipped, calm sentences that belonged to old training and older fear. Road conditions were worsening. An ambulance would try from the south route, but there was no promise on time. Warren looked at the woman, then at the dog, then at the white road already vanishing behind his truck. Waiting could become a coffin. "Not tonight," he said. The dog tried to rise when Warren slid his arms beneath the woman. Its front legs buckled. A pained sound came from its chest, half whine, half protest. "I know," Warren said, lifting the woman carefully. "You did your part." The dog dragged itself after him, 2 feet through the snow. Warren stopped. Something inside him shifted then, quietly but completely. He had seen brave men fail. He had seen decorated men run. He had seen frightened civilians share their last water and officers with perfect records turn their backs. Courage had never belonged to rank. Tonight it wore matted fur, a silver muzzle, and 1 crooked ear. Warren carried the woman to the truck and laid her across the back seat as gently as he could. Then he returned for the dog. The shepherd growled again when Warren approached, weaker this time, almost ashamed of the sound. "Save it," Warren said softly. "You can hate me when you're warm." He wrapped the second emergency blanket around the dog's body and lifted him. The animal was heavy, but too light for his size. Beneath the frozen coat, Warren felt ribs, trembling muscle, the stubborn drum of a heart that had refused to quit. The dog's head lolled against Warren's shoulder. For a moment, its cold nose touched the side of his neck. Warren stood still in the storm, holding him. It should not have affected him the way it did. He had carried bodies before, living, dying, dead. He had carried men through smoke and rubble, carried grief across years, carried silence into every room he entered. But this old dog had spent what little warmth he had on someone who was not even his owner. That knowledge entered Warren like a small blade. He loaded the dog into the truck beside the woman. The shepherd immediately, impossibly, shifted his muzzle toward her hand. His body shook under the blanket, but he kept contact with her, as if afraid that if he let go, the whole world would forget she existed. Warren climbed into the driver's seat and turned the heat up carefully, not too high, not too fast. He radioed June again, told her he was taking them to his cabin because the road to the clinic was closing and his place was closer. June did not argue. That alone told him she was scared. The Ford turned away from St. Agnes, tires clawing through snow. Behind him, the chapel vanished into white darkness, its bell rope still tapping in the wind like a small, unanswered prayer. Warren drove toward home with the storm pressing against the glass and 2 fragile lives breathing behind him. In the rearview mirror, the old German shepherd's amber eyes opened once. They met Warren's in the reflection. There was no gratitude in them, not yet. Only exhaustion, pain, and an ancient, stubborn command. Do not leave her. Warren tightened his hands on the wheel. "I won't," he said, and the truck pushed on through the snow. Warren Pike's cabin had never been built for guests. It sat back from the lake behind a stand of spruce and birch, low-roofed and broad-shouldered, as if it had learned from its owner how to endure weather without complaint. The porch sagged slightly on one side. The windows were old but tight. The chimney gave a steady thread of smoke whenever Warren remembered to feed the fire before the cold began arguing with the walls. Tonight, the cabin became a small hospital. Warren carried the old woman inside first. She was frighteningly light in his arms, all bones, wet wool, and shallow breath. He laid her on the couch near the fireplace, but not too close, then stripped away the snow-packed outer coat with careful hands. Her left ankle had swollen badly inside her boot. One shoulder showed a darkening bruise beneath the fabric of her dress. At the back of her head, under thin white hair, Warren found a tender swelling that made his jaw tighten. He did not curse. Men who cursed too early often had nothing useful left for later. He covered her in dry blankets, checked her pulse again, and kept speaking to her in a low, steady voice. "You're inside now. You're warm. You just have to keep doing the easy part." The easy part was breathing. The German Shepherd was harder. The dog did not want to come near the fire. He did not want to lie down. He did not want Warren's hands on his legs, ears, ribs, or chest. He wanted only one thing: to remain close enough to see the woman on the couch. Warren respected that. He laid a thick quilt on the floor between the hearth and the couch, then lowered the dog onto it. The shepherd's body shook under the emergency blanket. Ice clung to the black saddle of his back and the deep gold fur along his sides. His muzzle was silver with age. One ear stood sharp despite exhaustion. The other bent softly at the tip, giving him a look of weary suspicion, as if life had disappointed him many times and he had taken notes. "Easy," Warren murmured. "No direct heat. You don't need to cook, you need to thaw." The dog answered with a low rumble. Fair criticism. Warren worked anyway. He rubbed the dog down with dry towels, slow at first, letting the animal understand each movement before it happened. He checked the paws and found raw places between the pads. He found burrs matted near the tail. He found old scars hidden under the heavy coat and a thin line around the neck where a collar had once sat for a long time. The shepherd flinched once when Warren touched his left hind leg. "Old injury?" Warren asked softly. The dog looked at him. "All right." "None of my business yet." The wind pressed against the cabin windows, making the panes creak. Snow hissed along the walls like sand over stone. Warren moved between the woman and the dog, heating water, finding towels, setting a kettle near the stove, laying out what supplies he had. Outside, winter ruled the dark. Inside, time narrowed to breath, pulse, warmth. A sharp knock came at the door just before 9. Warren opened it with one hand on the frame and the other low at his side. Old habits did not ask permission. A woman in a Navy State Trooper coat stood on the porch, snow dusting her shoulders and the brim of her winter cap. She was in her early 40s, lean and straight-backed, with brown-black hair tucked under the cap and a small scar near her right eyebrow. Her eyes were amber-brown, alert without being theatrical. "Trooper Ruth Calder," she said. "June Bellamy called it in. Roads are bad, but I was already near the South Ridge." Warren stepped aside. "Warren Pike." "I know." He gave her a look. Ruth brushed snow from her sleeve as she entered. "Small town, large reputation. I try to keep both inaccurate." Her mouth twitched, but she did not smile fully. She took in the room with one sweep. The old woman on the couch, the dog near the hearth, the wet clothes by the door, the blankets, Warren's tools still half frozen in a pile beside the kitchen bench. "Ambulance can't make the lake road," Ruth said. "Clinic says keep her warm, monitor her head injury. Don't let her sleep too deep until morning if you can help it. They'll send Dr. Voss as soon as a plow opens the south turn. She has a pulse, breathing shallow but steady, ankles bad." Head impact. Ruth crouched beside the couch and spoke gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The old woman did not answer. The shepherd raised his head. The room changed. Not dramatically. No bark, no leap. Just a slow, deliberate lift of the skull. Amber eyes fixing on Ruth, as if the dog had appointed himself keeper of a border no one else could see. Ruth noticed. "I'm not here to hurt her," she said to the dog. Calm as church stone. The shepherd's lips trembled, but he did not growl. Warren watched that with interest. "Does he know her?" Ruth asked. "Seems to." You know who she is? Not yet. Ruth turned the old woman's wrist gently and found a thin bracelet with a small engraved plate. Snowmelt had gathered in the letters. She wiped it with her thumb. Mabel Crane, Ruth read. 76. Lives off Mill Street, behind the old laundromat. Warren knew the name then. Everyone did. In the half-formed way towns knew their quiet saints. Mabel Crane was the widow with the canvas bags. The woman who left stale bread for birds, soup jars on porches, and stern notes for anyone who parked across a shoveled walkway. He had fixed her back steps 2 winters ago. She had paid him with a jar of peach preserves and a warning that he looked like a man who forgot vegetables existed. Mabel, Warren repeated. The dog's tail moved once under the blanket. Just once. Small as a match striking in a cave. Ruth looked from the dog to Warren. That means something? It means he knows her name. Or it meant the old dog had been waiting for someone else to know it too. Ruth took photographs of Mabel's coat, the bruising beginning at her shoulder, the swollen ankle, the snow-wet sleeve torn at one seam. Her face remained professional, but her eyes sharpened at the bruise. Could be from a fall, she said. Could be. You don't think so? Warren stepped closer to the couch, careful not to crowd Ruth's work. She was behind the stone fence, not on the cleared path. Tarp pulled over her chest. Dog pressed against her windward side. If she slipped after something put her off the walkway. Something or someone. Ruth wrote that down without reacting. That made Warren respect her more. Many officers had a habit of defending the simplest answer because it saved time. Ruth Calder did not accept his suspicion, but she did not throw it away either. She bagged Mabel's torn glove, noted the bruise pattern, took Warren's account, and stood only when the old woman stirred faintly on the couch. Mabel Crane made a small sound, dry and irritated. Not fear, irritation. Good, Warren said. That sounds survivable. Her eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved. Ruth leaned in. Mrs. Crane? You're safe. You're at Warren Pike's cabin. Can you tell us what happened? Mabel's eyes opened a slit. They were pale blue, clouded with pain but not empty. She looked at Ruth, then at Warren, then passed them both toward the floor. The dog lifted his head higher. Mabel's fingers twitched. Bramble, she whispered. The shepherd made a sound then that Warren felt more than heard. A broken breath. A release. The old dog dragged one paw forward across the quilt, not enough to stand, only enough to reach toward the couch. Mabel's hand moved weakly from the blanket. Warren guided it down. The dog pressed his cold nose against her knuckles. For several seconds, no one in the room spoke. The fire snapped softly. The storm threw snow against the glass. Ruth lowered her notebook, just a little. Warren felt something old and unwelcome press behind his ribs. He had seen reunions after firefights, men laughing because they were not dead, men weeping without sound, a medic kissing a muddy forehead, a working dog refusing to leave a stretcher. But this was quieter. A widow and a stray, naming each other back into the world. Mabel's eyes closed again, but her hand stayed against the dog's muzzle. Bramble, Warren said softly. The dog's ear flicked. Figures, he murmured. You look like something that would survive being stepped on. Ruth gave him a sidelong glance. That your bedside manner? Best I've got. By midnight, Ruth had called in her preliminary notes and promised to return when the roads allowed. Before leaving, she stood by the door and looked once more at Mabel. If she remembers anything, call me. Not tomorrow, immediately. Warren nodded. And Pike? He looked at her. Don't decide the story before she wakes up. He held her gaze. I don't. Good. Men with training sometimes confuse instinct with evidence. Sometimes evidence starts as instinct. Ruth pulled her cap low. Then keep both warm until morning. She left, and the storm swallowed her taillights. Warren spent the night in the armchair with one boot on the floor and the other near the hearth. He did not sleep much. He woke Mabel gently every hour, asked her name, asked if she knew where she was. Sometimes, she answered. Sometimes she only frowned as if annoyed that death, weather, and Warren Pike were all equally inconvenient. Bramble did not sleep deeply either. When Warren brought a shallow bowl of warm water and softened meat, the dog sniffed it, then turned his head toward Mabel. Warren understood. She's covered, breathing, still with us. Bramble stared. Fine. Warren walked to the couch and adjusted Mabel's blanket in full view of the dog. He tucked the edge around her shoulder. Only then did Bramble lower his muzzle and eat. Slowly, painfully, as if accepting food were a duty he would rather postpone. Warren watched him and felt memory rise, not as a picture, but as a pressure. Another dog, another floor, a military hospital room, smelling of antiseptic and rain-soaked gear. A shepherd's head resting against his leg while machines measured the difference between survival and mercy. Warren had promised himself afterward that he would not do that again, not because love had failed, because it had succeeded too well and left a shape nothing else could fill. Bramble licked the bowl clean and sighed. Don't start, Warren told him. The dog looked up. I know what you are. Bramble blinked once, unimpressed. At dawn, the storm loosened its fist. Snow still fell, but gently now, drifting past the windows in soft white folds. The cabin smelled of wet wool, wood smoke, coffee, and dog. Mabel slept more steadily. Bramble's shaking had eased, though the old shepherd still kept himself angled toward the couch. A second visitor arrived just after sunrise. Doctor. Helen Marlowe came in with a battered medical bag in one hand and a veterinary kit in the other, because in Lake Wren, the difference between humans and animals often depended on who could pay and who bit first. Helen was in her late 40s, broad-handed, with silver-streaked brown hair tucked under a knitted cap. Her face had the blunt tenderness of someone who had delivered calves at midnight, stitched farm dogs on kitchen tables, and told lonely old men the truth when their pets were dying. Where's my patient? She asked. Warren pointed to Mabel. Helen looked at him. That's Dr. Voss's patient. I meant the furry one with poor judgment. Bramble gave a low warning from the quilt. Helen set down her bag. Hello to you too, Your Majesty. Warren almost smiled. Helen examined Bramble with patience and no nonsense. She checked his gums, paws, joints, ears, breathing, and temperature. Bramble tolerated her because Mabel slept through it, and Warren remained nearby. Once, when Helen lifted his back leg, Bramble growled softly. Old injury, Helen said. Left hip or knee? Not fresh. He's been compensating for a long time. He stray? Now, maybe. Not always. Helen parted the fur around his neck, showing the pale line of an old collar mark. See this? Wore a collar for years. Neutered. Nails are rough now, but they were trimmed regularly once. And look at how he reacts when Mrs. Crane moves. Mabel shifted under her blanket, murmuring in her sleep. Bramble's head lifted immediately. Not startled, attentive. Helen's expression softened. He knows old bodies, she said. Some dogs grow up around children, some around livestock. This one knows the slow movements of the elderly, knows to stay close, knows not to jump, knows warmth matters. Warren looked at the dog. So he had someone, likely, and lost them. Helen packed away her thermometer. Most strays are not born stray, Warren. They're made, one absence at a time. That sentence stayed in the cabin after she said it. Mabel woke fully near mid-morning. Her first complaint was about the ceiling. Your rafters need oil, she rasped. Warren looked up. Rafters don't take oil. They would, if men listened. Helen laughed under her breath. She'll live. Mabel's eyes found Bramble, and the sharpness in her face broke into something fragile. Oh, you foolish old hedge beast, she whispered. Bramble thumped his tail once. Warren brought her water. She drank with shaking hands, then looked at him more clearly. You're Pike. Yes, ma'am. You fixed my steps. You paid in preserves. They were excellent preserves. They were aggressive preserves. A faint smile touched her mouth. Then pain pulled it away. Ruth returned before noon, boots wet with slush, notebook ready. This time Mabel could answer, though not cleanly. Her memory came in pieces, like broken glass picked from snow. She remembered carrying a canvas bag of old wool blankets toward St. Agnes. She remembered worrying that 2 men who slept behind the chapel might not have made it to the shelter. She remembered the smell of expensive pine cologne. "Not real pine," she said, eyes closed. "Store pine, the kind a man buys when he wants to smell honest." Ruth wrote it down. Mabel remembered shoes on stone, a man's voice, polite, cold around the edges. "You should let people with proper training handle distribution," the voice had said. Warren stood very still. Mabel swallowed. "I told him hunger doesn't care about paperwork." "What happened then?" Ruth asked. Mabel's hand trembled against the blanket. "He took my sleeve, or I took his. I don't know. There was pulling." I remember being angry. Then the step vanished. Her eyes opened, wet now but fierce. I hit the stone. I couldn't get up. My leg wouldn't listen. Snow was in my mouth. Bramble whined softly. Mabel turned her head toward him. Then he came, barking like Gabriel with bad hips. Warren huffed once, despite himself. "He is not mine," Mabel said after a moment. "Not properly. He started coming round the laundromat 3 weeks ago. I fed him scraps. He pretended not to need them. Very proud. Very thin. Like some people." She glanced at Warren. He ignored that. "But every evening," she continued, "he walked me home, never too close. Just enough that anyone with wicked ideas might reconsider." Her voice thinned. "If he hadn't stayed with me last night, I'd have gone cold before you found me." The room was quiet. Bramble had fallen asleep with his nose against the bottom of the couch, close enough that Mabel's fingers could touch his ear if she reached down. Warren added a split log to the fire. Flames caught along the bark, slow at first, then bright. He had no speech ready, no promise large enough to be useful. Outside, the storm had softened into a white hush, but inside the cabin, something had begun that Warren did not yet know how to name. A widow who had refused to let strangers freeze, a dog who had refused to let her die alone, and a man who had spent years keeping his door mostly closed, now standing beside a fire he had built for others. Mabel watched the flames. "His name is Bramble," she said. "I heard. He'll act like he doesn't need anyone." Warren looked down at the old shepherd. "Seems common around here." Mabel's mouth curved faintly. "Can you look after him a few days?" The question was small. That was why it found the weak place in him. Warren did not answer right away. He listened to the fire, to the old woman breathing, to the dog dreaming in soft, troubled twitches at his feet. Then he said, "A few days." Bramble opened one amber eye. Only one. As if the dog knew a temporary promise when he heard one, and had already decided to outlive it. By morning, Lake Wren looked forgiven. The storm had passed east before dawn, leaving behind a world so bright it almost hurt to look at. Snow lay over the town in clean, generous layers. The frozen lake shone blue-silver under a pale winter sun. Icicles hung from the eaves of the bakery like glass organ pipes, and every roof wore a soft white crown. Tourists would have called it magical. Warren Pike called it dangerous. Beauty had a habit of making people lower their guard. Snow could turn a broken fence into a postcard. It could smooth over footprints, hide tire tracks, soften the edge of a bad decision until it looked almost harmless. Warren had seen that kind of mercy before. The kind that made truth harder to find. Inside his cabin, Mabel Crane had been ordered to rest. She obeyed with the visible resentment of a queen forced into exile by incompetent ministers. Her left ankle was wrapped and elevated. A bruise darkened along her shoulder. Dr. Helen Marlowe had checked her again before leaving and warned her not to go marching around town like a saint with poor balance. Mabel had replied that saints were generally more useful after ignoring advice. Warren had not smiled in front of Helen, but he had almost failed. Bramble stayed near Mabel's door for most of the morning. The old German shepherd had recovered enough to stand, though not gracefully. His left hind leg dragged slightly when he first rose, then steadied after a few steps. His black and gold coat, brushed free of snow and ice, still looked rough, as if the weather had written its own scripture through the fur. The silver on his muzzle made him seem older in daylight. One ear stood firm, the other tipped at the end like a broken pennant after battle. Warren intended to keep him inside. Bramble disagreed. The disagreement was quiet. No barking. No dramatic escape. The dog simply rose when Warren put on his field jacket, limped to the door, and stood there with the patient certainty of an old judge awaiting a confession. "You're not coming," Warren said. Bramble looked at him. "You were half frozen 2 nights ago." The dog continued looking. "This isn't a negotiation." From the couch, Mabel's voice drifted thin but sharp. "He does that." Warren turned. "Does what?" "Wins without speaking. Very annoying quality. You two should get along." Warren looked back at Bramble. The dog gave one slow, dignified wag of his tail. "Fine," Warren muttered. "But if you fall over, I'm telling Helen it was your idea." Bramble accepted this contract by stepping outside first. The town smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, diesel, and clean snow. Warren drove slowly toward the community hall, with Bramble lying in the passenger footwell, wrapped in Mabel's old red-brown scarf, because she had insisted. It made the dog look, Warren thought, like a retired professor who had survived several wars and disapproved of modern furniture. At the center of town, people were already moving again. A snowblower coughed in front of the pharmacy. 2 teenagers from the volunteer crew carried shovels past the diner. An elderly man brushed snow from the windshield of a car that probably had no intention of starting. The community hall stood at the end of Maple Street, its windows fogged from the warmth inside, its front steps carved into narrow channels by boots. The shelter was louder than Warren expected. Not chaotic exactly, just full. Cots lined one wall beneath paper snowflakes left over from some forgotten school event. Folding tables had been pushed together near the kitchen window. A coffee urn hissed. Someone coughed. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else slept sitting upright, chin on chest, as if afraid lying down would mean surrender. June Bellamy stood in the middle of it all, with her clipboard tucked under one arm and a pencil behind her ear. Her red coat had been traded for a thick gray sweater, sleeves rolled up, as though she planned to wrestle the entire storm personally if it came back. She saw Warren and pointed at him. "You brought the dog." He filed an appeal. June looked down at Bramble, who stood beside Warren's leg, and surveyed the room with solemn suspicion. "He looks like he's judging my shelter setup." "He is. Tell him to take a number." A few people turned to stare. Not at Warren. They were used to him appearing wherever something needed lifting. They stared at Bramble. A woman wrapped in a donated quilt whispered, "That the dog from St. Agnes?" A man near the coffee urn crossed himself quietly. Someone else said, "Poor old boy." Bramble ignored pity with the practiced dignity of a creature who had met worse insults. Warren noticed the first problem near the supply tables. There were blankets, but not enough thick ones. There were coats, but many were thin autumn jackets pretending to be winter gear. A row of boots sat beneath a handwritten sign, yet half the sizes were missing. On the far table, 2 small space heaters had been set aside, both tagged as broken. June followed his gaze. "Don't start," she said. "I haven't said anything. You have a silent version. It's efficient." Her face tightened. The humor left her eyes. "We're short." "How short?" "Short enough that I'm giving people 2 thin blankets and pretending that equals 1 good one." She slapped the clipboard lightly against her thigh. "We had donations. I saw them come in. Heavy winter coats, thermal socks, proper blankets, portable heaters. Boxes of them. Where are they? That is the question currently making me want to commit several uncharitable acts." Before Warren could answer, Owen Lark appeared from the storage hallway carrying a neat stack of forms in one gloved hand. He looked untouched by the room. Not physically. His boots were clean, his charcoal coat brushed free of lint, his dark blonde hair still precisely arranged beneath the cap in his hand. Around him, people smelled of soup, damp socks, and exhaustion. Owen smelled faintly of expensive pine, the kind sold in glass bottles with names like Alpine Reserve. "June," he said, pleasant and controlled. "The inventory isn't missing. It's allocated." June turned slowly. "Allocated to whom? The ghosts in the attic?" Owen gave Warren a brief nod, then glanced down at Bramble. Something passed across his face too quickly to name. Not fear. Recognition, perhaps. Or irritation. The dog's body changed. It was subtle. His head lowered. The fur along his shoulders lifted in a dark ridge. A sound gathered in his throat, low and unfinished. Warren laid 2 fingers lightly against the dog's neck. Bramble did not look away from Owen. Owen's smile stayed in place, but it thinned. The relief routes were divided last night. Some supplies went to outlying homes before the roads closed. Some are being held for second-wave distribution. It's all in the records. June snatched the top sheet from his hand. These records say 32 heavy blankets were delivered here. They were received here. That is a deeply useless sentence. They were processed here, Owen corrected, still mild. Then reassigned according to need. Whose need? The North District has several stranded residents. Names. Owen's expression softened in a way Warren disliked. It was the expression of a man preparing to sound patient in public. "June, everyone is tired. After a storm like that, confusion is inevitable. We shouldn't let anxiety create accusations." June's mouth opened. Warren spoke first, softly. "No one accused you." Owen looked at him. The room did not go silent, but it seemed to listen harder. Warren met his eyes without heat. That was something he had learned long ago. Anger warned people. Calm made them show themselves. "I'm just curious," Warren said. 32 blankets came in. People here are cold. You say the blankets went somewhere colder. Seems easy to clear up." "Of course," Owen said. "And it will be, once the paperwork is compiled properly." June muttered, "If I hear the word properly one more time, I may become a weather event." Owen smiled at that as if it were charming. Bramble growled. This time, more people heard it. An old woman at the table pulled her quilt tighter. A volunteer paused with a ladle in one hand. Owen looked at the dog, then at Warren. "Is he safe indoors?" Warren glanced down. Bramble's body trembled, but not from weakness alone. "He knows when to be quiet," Warren said. Owen's eyes cooled. "That wasn't what I asked." "No," Warren said. "It wasn't." The moment held for only a breath. Then a burst of laughter came from the kitchen window, loud and warm enough to break the tension. "June Bellamy, if you scare off another administrator, I'm charging the town for soup by the emotional damage." Tessa Monroe backed through the kitchen door, carrying a wide metal pot with both hands. She was 44, round-faced, red-brown hair, pinned up beneath a patterned scarf, cheeks flushed from stove heat. Her honey-colored sweater sleeves were pushed up above strong forearms, marked with tiny kitchen burns. She moved like someone who had carried hot things through crowded rooms all her life and trusted people to get out of the way. June pointed at Owen without looking away. "He started it." "Of course he did," Tessa said. "Men with clean boots always start something." Several people laughed. Owen did not. Tessa set the pot on the serving table and saw Warren. Her face changed not dramatically, but enough. Concern moved in behind the warmth. "You found Mabel," she said. Warren nodded. "She awake?" "Some." "Mad?" "Yes." "Good." That woman could outlive us all through spite and chamomile. Tessa ladled soup into a paper bowl and handed it to Warren, though he had not asked. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She told me last week something was wrong with the blankets." Warren did not move. "What exactly?" Tessa looked toward Owen. He had turned aside to speak with a volunteer, but his posture suggested he was hearing more than he admitted. "Not here," Tessa said. Warren accepted the soup. Bramble, still beside his leg, finally looked away from Owen and sniffed the bowl. "No," Warren told him. "This is mine." Tessa looked at the dog. "That's Bramble?" The dog raised his head at the name. Tessa's eyes softened. "Well, look at you. Mabel said you were handsome in a tragic, underfed, judgmental way." Warren glanced down at Bramble. "Accurate." Tessa crouched carefully, not reaching for him. She used to leave scraps behind the laundromat. Said he'd wait until she went inside before eating. Proud old thing. Bramble sniffed the air near her hand, then looked away. It was not affection, but it was not refusal either. Tessa smiled. High praise. Later, when the lunch rush thinned and June had gone to argue with a generator, Tessa led Warren to the side hallway near the coat racks. Through the window at the end, the town looked harmless again. White roofs, blue shadows, gold light on snowbanks, a kingdom of sugar and frost. Tessa folded her arms. Mabel came into the diner 3 days before the storm, she said. She had that little blue notebook of hers. She was upset, not loud upset. Mabel doesn't do loud unless someone insults pie crust. But she said trucks were going out with full loads and coming back light without delivering where they were supposed to. Did she say which trucks? Relief trucks, white ones, town seal on the side. Tessa rubbed her thumb over a burn mark on her wrist. She said some people weren't on the official list because they didn't have IDs, or because they moved around too much, or because somebody decided they were inconvenient to count. Warren looked back toward the main room. A man slept with his boots still on because no one had found his size. A woman warmed her hands around a paper cup, though the coffee had gone cold. Near the supply table, June was holding up a thin blanket and scowling at it as if it had personally betrayed her. Tessa, Warren asked, why didn't she tell June? She was going to. Tessa's eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. She said she wanted proof first. Mabel hates making trouble unless she can bring receipts. That sounded true. And you? Warren asked, not accusing, just asking. Tessa winced anyway. I thought she might be tired, worried. You know how people talk about old women, too anxious, too nosy, too much time on their hands. Her jaw tightened. Mabel paid my electric bill once, years ago. I never told anyone. I was 3 days from closing the diner, and that old woman walked in pretending she needed 12 jars of soup delivered across town. Paid double, left before I could cry at her. She looked toward Bramble through the doorway. I owed her better listening. Warren said nothing. There were confessions a man should not interrupt. That afternoon, he began watching instead of reacting. He watched Owen move through the hall with soft authority, answering questions before they formed edges. He watched June handle people directly, messy and human, while Owen handled papers. He watched volunteers accept explanations because explanations were easier than shortages. He watched the shelter divide itself without meaning to. Those who had names on lists and those waiting for someone to decide they were real. The system, Warren realized, had split down a clean line. June had people, Owen had inventory, and somewhere between the two, warmth was disappearing. Bramble stayed close, though he was visibly tiring. Once, an older man near the far wall began coughing hard into a napkin. Bramble limped over, slowly, and sat beside him without invitation. The man looked down. "Well, hello there," he rasped. Warren recognized him vaguely. Glenn Harrow, a former mechanic who had lost his trailer after a fire and then lost the thread of ordinary life one winter at a time. Glenn was thin beneath 3 layers of donated clothing, with a gray beard unevenly trimmed and hands that shook when they were empty. Bramble lowered himself beside Glenn's boots, resting his chin across one of them. Glenn went very still. Then he put one hand on the dog's head. Gently, almost formally, as if accepting a medal from a tired king. Warren looked away before the moment could accuse him of anything. Near 3 o'clock, Ruth Calder arrived at the community hall. Snow had melted dark patches into her Navy trooper coat, and her waterproof notebook was already in hand. "Pike," she said, Walk with me." They drove to St. Agnes in Warren's truck, leaving Bramble reluctantly under June's watch at the hall. The old chapel looked different in daylight, smaller, sadder. The storm had carved smooth drifts against the stone fence, but the sun had begun to loosen the top layer, revealing hard ridges beneath. Ruth moved carefully, photographing before stepping. Warren respected that. A scene changed when people entered it. Good investigators knew how to apologize with their boots. "Show me where you found her," Ruth said. Warren pointed to the gap between two fence posts near the rear path. "There." Ruth crouched. The snow had been disturbed by Warren's rescue, by wind, by time. Still, not everything had vanished. A scuff along the stone step. A smear of dark wool snagged on rough mortar. A shallow depression where a body had lain. Ruth studied the path. If she fell from the step, she could have rolled. Could have. But you don't like it. No. Why? Warren looked at the fence, the angle of the step, the place where Mabel had been found. Because the dog was on the windward side. He chose that position after she was down. The tarp was pulled from the shed corner. That took effort, time. He stayed long enough to think. Ruth glanced at him. "You're giving the dog a lot of credit. He earned it." She did not argue. Warren moved toward the fence, scanning the stones. He did not know what he expected. He only knew some part of him had not finished with this place. Snowmelt dripped from the chapel roof. The old bell rope knocked once in the wind, softer now, less like a warning than a memory. Then he saw a glint, not bright, just a dull flash of brass wedged in ice between two stones. He crouched and brushed snow aside with 2 fingers. A button, round, heavy, brass or brass-plated, stamped with a small raised emblem, the Lake Wren winter relief mark, a pine tree inside a circle. Ruth was beside him immediately. "Don't touch it. I wasn't planning to frame it." She photographed it in place, then eased it free with gloved fingers and dropped it into an evidence bag. Warren looked toward the rear steps. The button was too fine for most volunteer coats. Too official. Ruth held the bag up against the pale light. Her face gave away nothing, but the line of her mouth hardened. "Could have come from anyone in relief coordination," she said. "Could have? That includes several people." "Yes." She looked at him. "And you're thinking of one." Warren watched snow slide silently from the chapel roof and fall in a soft collapse beside the shed. "I'm thinking Mabel didn't fall alone." Ruth tucked the bag into her case. "That's not proof." "No, but it is a question." Warren nodded. Questions, in his experience, are long dangerous things. Given enough time, they learn to sharpen themselves. They returned to the community hall near dusk. The sky had turned lavender beyond the town roofs. Lights glowed in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lake Wren looked, once again, like a painting hung to reassure the world of its own innocence. Inside, the shelter had quieted. People ate soup. Volunteers folded sheets. June argued with a supply form in whispers, which for her was nearly a religious act. Owen was nowhere in sight. Bramble lay near Glen Harrow now, chin on the old man's boot as before. Glen's trembling hand rested lightly on the dog's head. The man had fallen asleep sitting up, his face softened in a way Warren had not seen earlier. Warren stood in the doorway and looked at them. A missing blanket was not just a missing blanket. It was a man's hands shaking through the night. It was an old woman walking through a storm because she knew names the paperwork had lost. It was a dog giving warmth he did not have to spare. It was the oldest question winter asked every town that believed itself kind. Who gets brought inside? And who is told, gently and properly, to wait in the cold? Warren Pike did not trust anger before sunrise. Anger was useful in a fight. It lit the blood, tightened the hand, made a man cross distances his body had no business crossing. But anger was a poor investigator. It wanted doors kicked open when a window would do. It wanted a confession before the facts had learned to stand. So he waited, not passively. Warren had never been good at that. He waited the way old ice waited beneath a lake, still on the surface, moving where no one could see. The night after finding the brass button at St. Agnes, he called Ruth Calder and told her what Tessa had said, what June had seen missing, what Mabel remembered in fragments, and what the button suggested without proving. Ruth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I'm bringing this to Captain Whitcomb. You trust her?" "I trust her to hate sloppy cases." "That's not the same thing." "It's better. People who love justice can be dramatic. Nora Whitcomb loves clean paperwork, admissible evidence, and making liars answer questions in rooms with bad coffee." Warren considered that. "I can work with that." Captain Nora Whitcomb called him an hour later. Her voice came through the phone, dry and low, the kind of voice that did not need volume because it had spent years making men in better suits regret speaking too quickly. "Mr. Pike," she said, "Trooper Calder tells me you found physical evidence near the alleged fall site." "Near the site?" "Yes. Not enough by itself." "Good. You understand the problem." "I understand Owen Lark will turn this into administrative confusion if you move too early." There was the faintest pause. Not surprise. Approval, maybe. "He already has," Nora said. "He filed an internal shortage explanation this evening. Weather delay, temporary reassignment, incomplete intake records." Very polished. He knew someone would ask. Men like that live by the question they expect, not the truth that happened. Papers shifted on her end. "We need movement. Where the supplies went, who signed, who transported, and we need it before he cleans the trail." Warren looked across his cabin. Mabel slept in the smaller room, her injured ankle propped on pillows, her blue notebook on the bedside table like a weapon disguised as stationery. Bramble lay just outside her door, muzzle on his paws, ears working even in sleep. "I'll watch the warehouse," Warren said. "Do not confront him." "I wasn't planning to." "I'm told men with your background often say that shortly before doing the opposite." "Trooper Calder said that?" "Experience said that." Warren almost smiled. "I'll observe." "Observe legally." "That's less fun." "Most useful things are." The call ended there. Warren slept 2 hours in the armchair, boots on, jacket folded over his chest. At 4:30 he rose without alarm. Some habits live too deep for clocks. The cabin was black except for the low orange pulse of the stove. Outside, the world had gone blue with early cold. Snowbanks hunched beneath the windows. The lake beyond the trees was invisible, but he could feel its flat emptiness in the dark. Bramble opened one amber eye when Warren moved. "No," Warren whispered. The dog lifted his head. "You're staying." Bramble stood, slowly and painfully, as if assembling himself from old bones and stubborn weather. His left hind leg trembled. Mabel's red-brown scarf hung loose around his neck. Warren stared at him. Bramble stared back. From behind the bedroom door came Mabel's rough voice. "If you're arguing with him, you've already lost. You're supposed to be asleep. So are decent people. Neither of us qualify." A pause. "Take him." "If he wants to go, he has a reason." Warren did not like that. Not because it sounded mystical, but because it sounded like something a person said when they had already accepted a dog's authority over men. "He's not ready." Mabel coughed once. "Neither are you, half the time." That ended the debate, mostly because Warren had no argument that would not sound foolish in front of a door. He helped Bramble into the back seat of the Ford and folded a wool blanket under him. The old shepherd lowered himself with a grunt, not proud of needing help, but not too proud to accept it. That, Warren thought, already made him wiser than many officers he had known. The town was still asleep when they rolled toward the relief warehouse. Lake Wren before dawn had a sacred look, as if the world had been emptied for some private ceremony. Streetlights glowed through blue snow. The bakery was dark. The diner's windows were black, except for one small lamp over the counter, where Tessa would be arriving soon to bully flour into bread and grief into soup. The community hall showed a few warm squares of light. People slept inside under too thin blankets, trusting that morning would bring what night had failed to. Warren parked 2 blocks from the warehouse with the truck facing outward. The relief warehouse stood behind the old feed store, a long, low building with metal siding and a loading bay that opened onto a service road. Snow had been plowed into rough banks along the fence. 2 Whitetown relief trucks sat near the rear doors, their sides marked with the Lake Wren Winter Aid emblem. For 23 minutes, nothing happened. Warren watched. Bramble breathed softly behind him. The heater ticked. Dawn light gathered along the edge of the sky. At 5:17, the warehouse side door opened. Owen Lark stepped out carrying a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Even at that hour, even in that cold, he looked assembled rather than dressed. Charcoal coat, black gloves, boots clean enough to shame the road. Behind him came a man Warren recognized from the volunteer crew. Arthur Vail, mid-30s, narrow-faced, wearing a brown knit cap pulled low, and the expression of someone who had slept badly for several years. Arthur moved like a man, trying not to be noticed by his own conscience. Owen spoke to him briefly. Arthur nodded too quickly. The loading bay door rose with a grinding metallic shutter. Warren lifted his phone and began recording. Crates came out first, then boxes, then bundled blankets wrapped in clear plastic. Heavy winter blankets, thick and dark, the kind June had been looking for at the shelter. 2 portable heaters were loaded next. Then sealed cartons marked thermal socks, weatherproof gloves, emergency liners. Each one bore a donation sticker from Lake Wren Community Relief. Owen checked the items against his clipboard. Arthur loaded them into the rear of one white truck with stiff, hurried movements. Once, a box slipped from his hands and split against the metal liftgate. A spill of wool socks rolled into the snow. Arthur froze. Owen looked at him. He did not shout. He did not need to. His stillness was the reprimand. Arthur gathered the socks quickly, brushing snow from them with shaking hands. Warren felt Bramble shift in the back seat. The dog had raised his head. Through the windshield, the old shepherd watched Owen with a focus that had nothing frantic in it. This was not the growl of a confused animal. It was recognition of a shape in the world that had once brought harm. Warren lowered his voice. Easy. Bramble did not growl. That was somehow worse. When the truck pulled out, Warren waited until it turned onto the north road before following. He kept distance. Too much distance for an ordinary tale, just enough for a man who knew how to let terrain do some of the watching. The road climbed beyond town, curving through spruce woods washed blue by dawn. Snow clung to every branch. The frozen lake appeared between the trees, its surface catching the first gold of morning. North Lantern Lodge sat on a rise above the water. It was beautiful in the way expensive places often were. Stone chimneys, wide windows, dark timber beams, warm porch lights glowing against the snow. Smoke drifted from 3 chimneys in slow ribbons. Several SUVs slept under fresh powder near the entrance, guests stranded by the storm, but stranded comfortably, behind glass and firelight and enough brandy to make hardship decorative. The relief truck drove past the main entrance and around toward a service lane. Warren parked near a maintenance pullout below the ridge, screened by a wall of snow-heavy firs. He left the engine off. Bramble lifted his head again. "You stay here," Warren whispered. "That one isn't a debate." The dog gave him a look that suggested all debates remained open pending appeal. Warren stepped out with his phone, a small camera, and binoculars. He moved through the trees until he had a clear angle on the service yard behind the lodge. The truck backed up to a storage annex. Owen got out first. Arthur followed, shoulders hunched. A third man emerged from the lodge, tall, soft around the middle, wearing an expensive quilted vest over a cream sweater. His silver hair was combed back carefully, and his face had the smooth, pink look of someone who experienced winter primarily through windows. Warren knew him by sight. Clive Mercer, general manager of North Lantern Lodge. Clive spread his arms in a gesture of gratitude that looked rehearsed even from a distance. Owen shook his hand. Warren began recording again. The boxes were unloaded into the annex. Blankets, gloves, heaters, boots, not leftovers. not damaged goods. The best winter supplies Lake Wren had collected. Warren's anger came then, quiet and clean. Not hot. Clean anger was worse. It did not shake the hand. A woman in a housekeeping coat paused by the service door as the boxes went past. She looked at the labels, then at Owen, then quickly away. Her face registered what the others pretended not to see. Those supplies did not belong here. Owen and Clive stepped beneath the awning near the annex door. Warren moved closer along the tree line, careful to keep the snowbank between himself and the yard. Their voices came in fragments at first. "Understand the optics," Clive was saying. "The optics improve when donors see reliability," Owen replied. "Your guests include 3 board members, 1 state senator's husband, and half the Winter Development Committee. If they see Lake Wren relief functioning under pressure, they remember who made that happen." "And the shelter?" "The shelter has enough for now." Warren's jaw tightened. Clive glanced toward the boxes. "These are community donations, Owen." "These are resources," Owen said. "Resources must be positioned where they produce the greatest long-term benefit." There it was, the old spell. The one men used when they wanted to make cruelty sound like mathematics. "Your pledge to the foundation," Owen continued, "will fund twice this amount next season, but only if we demonstrate competence." Clive rubbed his chin. "And if someone asks?" "Temporary reassignment due to stranded guests and road closures. Perfectly defensible," Mrs. Crane was asking. The name struck the cold air like a dropped glass. Warren went very still. Owen's face did not change much, but something in his posture tightened. Mabel Crane is a sentimental woman with no understanding of logistics. She was at St. Agnes that night? A pause. She should have been home. Clive lowered his voice. Warren had to lean slightly to hear. "She fell?" Owen looked toward the snowy yard. "She interfered." "That isn't an answer." "She grabbed my sleeve. I pulled away. She lost her footing." It was dark, icy, and she had no business being there. His voice remained controlled, but a brittle edge appeared beneath it. "I did not push an old woman down, Clive." "What did you do?" Another pause. Snow slid from the awning and landed softly beside them. "I left," Owen said. For the first time, Clive looked genuinely unsettled. Owen continued, more quietly. "The storm was already rising. I assumed someone would find her. She is always wandering where she shouldn't." "And if they hadn't?" Owen turned his head slowly toward the storage annex where Lake Wren's blankets disappeared into warmth meant for paying guests. "Then it would have been a tragic accident during a blizzard." Warren stopped recording only because his thumb had gone numb against the phone. For a moment, the whole mountain seemed silent. No wind, no engines, no lodge laughter behind glass. Only that sentence, sitting in the snow like a poisoned thing. Warren had heard men excuse worse, in darker places, with better uniforms. But this was different in a way that sickened him. Owen had not spoken like a murderer. He had spoken like a man disappointed by inconvenience. That was the uglier sin. A soft whine came from behind him. Warren turned. Bramble stood at the edge of the trees. The old dog had somehow climbed from the truck and followed Warren's path through the snow. He was trembling from the effort, breath steaming, red-brown scarf darkened with frost. His amber eyes were fixed not on the boxes, not on Clive, but on Owen. Warren moved quickly and crouched in front of him, blocking the view from the service yard. "Damn it," he whispered. "You stubborn old hedge beast." Bramble gave a low, broken growl. Owen's head turned slightly. Warren froze, one hand on Bramble's collar. The service yard remained still. Clive said something Warren could not hear. Owen looked away again. Warren lowered his mouth near Bramble's ear. "Not yet." The dog's body shook beneath his hand. "Not because he deserves waiting," Warren murmured. "Because Mabel deserves this done right." Bramble's growl faded into a harsh breath. Slowly, painfully, he sat. It was not obedience. It was trust. Offered unwillingly. Warren felt the weight of it. Trust from people was complicated. It came wrapped in words, bargains, histories. Trust from a dog was simpler and more terrible. It said, "I will follow your choice. Do not make it a coward's choice." Warren took more photographs. The truck, the license plate, the annex, the labels on boxes as they passed beneath the light. Owen's face beside Clive's, Arthur carrying supplies with his head down. Then Arthur looked toward the tree line. For 1 second, his eyes met Warren's. Arthur stopped with a box in his hands. Warren did not move. Arthur's face drained. He glanced toward Owen, then away. He carried the box inside, but his steps had changed. A man could walk under orders for a long time, but once he knew someone had seen him, the weight became personal. Warren guided Bramble back toward the truck. The old shepherd leaned heavily against his leg twice, but did not collapse. That small dignity mattered, so Warren pretended not to notice. Once inside the Ford, he sent everything to Ruth. Photos, video, timestamps, location. Then he sent a second copy to Captain Nora Whitcomb, using the number she had given him the night before. Ruth replied first. "Got it. Do not approach." Nora moving. Nora's reply came 2 minutes later. "Good. Keep your phone on. Do not become part of my evidence problem." Warren read the message and almost laughed once. Almost. Down in the service yard, the last of the supplies disappeared into the storage annex. Owen signed a paper on Clive's clipboard. Clive shook his hand again, less warmly now. Arthur stood behind the truck, staring at nothing. The lodge windows glowed gold in the morning. Behind them, guests would be waking to hot coffee, dry socks, clean towels, and the comfortable belief that storms revealed the best in people. Warren looked at those windows, then thought of Glen Harrow sleeping upright at the shelter beneath 2 thin blankets. He thought of Mabel on his couch, her bruised shoulder under wool. He thought of June trying to stretch scarcity into fairness with a pencil and fury. Bramble lifted his head from the back seat. His nose left a foggy mark on the window. The old dog stared toward the annex where the blankets had gone. He did not growl now. He did not bark. He simply watched. In that silence, Warren understood something that had nothing to do with law yet. Bramble was no longer only the creature who had guarded Mabel in the snow. He had become a witness to the shape of the town itself, who was warmed first, who was explained away, who had to bleed or freeze before their name became inconvenient enough to matter. Warren started the truck. He did not follow Owen when the relief vehicle left the lodge. He did not confront Clive Mercer. He did not kick open the annex door and carry the supplies out by hand, though some rough part of him wanted exactly that. Instead, he drove back down the mountain with the evidence secured, the dog breathing behind him, and anger sitting beside him like a silent passenger. At the first bend, sunlight broke across the frozen lake. For one shining second, the whole valley looked holy. Warren kept both hands on the wheel. "Looks can lie," he said. In the rearview mirror, Bramble blinked slowly, as if he had known that all along. Chapter 5. Mabel returns to St. Agnes. By the third morning, Mabel Crane had become dangerous again. Not physically. Her left ankle was still wrapped tight and propped on 2 pillows. The bruise on her shoulder had deepened to the color of old plums. She moved carefully, and sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, pain crossed her face and made her look every one of her 76 years. But her eyes had sharpened. That was what worried Warren. A body could be confined to a couch. A woman like Mabel could not. She sat in his cabin beneath a quilt, wearing a blue-gray cardigan Warren suspected had been knitted before several town officials were born. Her white hair was pinned loosely at the back of her head. On the small table beside her lay a cup of tea, a pencil stub, and a pale blue notebook with curled corners. Bramble lay on the rug near her feet, wrapped in his own silence, one ear up and one tipped like an old flag after battle. He had slept poorly. Whenever Mabel shifted, he lifted his head. Whenever Warren walked near the door, the dog watched him as if checking whether humans had finally learned to make sensible decisions. They had not. "I need to go back," Mabel said. Warren stood near the stove, pouring coffee strong enough to qualify as a misdemeanor. "No." She looked at him over the rim of her teacup. "That was quick." "Did you enjoy it?" "Not much." "Then try again, with better manners." "No, ma'am." Bramble thumped his tail once. Mabel pointed at the dog. "See? Even he thinks you're being rude. He thinks everything is a courtroom." "That is because he has standards." Warren leaned back against the counter. His olive combat shirt was visible beneath the open front of his field jacket, sleeves pushed to the forearms. He had not slept enough since St. Agnes. Lack of sleep made the world feel too bright around the edges, and Mabel's determination had a way of finding those edges and poking them with a knitting needle. "You have a head injury," he said. "A bad ankle." "You remember enough for Ruth to work with?" "No," Mabel said. "I remember enough to know something happened. Not enough to make the right people stop pretending it didn't." Warren looked toward the window. Outside, Lake Wren glittered in the morning sun, all white roofs, blue shadows, and smoke lifting lazily from chimneys. The kind of morning that tried to convince a man the world was clean. On the kitchen table, his phone held the photos and videos from North Lantern Lodge, boxes of donated blankets going into a warm annex, Owen Lark speaking beneath an awning, Arthur Vale carrying shame, one box at a time. Ruth Calder had confirmed receipt. Captain Nora Whitcomb was building the chain. But Mabel knew something evidence did not: the shape of the moment when Owen had chosen to leave her in the storm. Warren knew better than most that memory could be a battlefield after injury. Pieces returned out of order. Sounds without faces, faces without time. A smell sharp enough to drag a person backward years. If they took her to St. Agnes, perhaps she would remember more. Or perhaps they would ask too much of an old woman who had already been asked by Winter to prove she deserved saving. "I'm not taking you there to hurt yourself," he said. Mabel set down her teacup. "Mr. Pike, I have lived through 76 winters. If I were afraid of snow, I'd have surrendered sometime around Eisenhower." That line sounds rehearsed. It became necessary when men started confusing age with permission to command me. Bramble rose stiffly and limped to her side. The old shepherd placed his muzzle on her knee, not heavily, just enough to be counted. Mabel's hand settled on his silvered head. "There," she said, "the sensible one has voted." Warren looked at the dog. "You're not helping." Bramble blinked. An hour later, Warren carried Mabel down his porch steps while she complained that he was treating her like a sack of flour with opinions. "Flour complains less," he said, "only because you don't bake properly." Tessa Monroe arrived first at St. Agnes, driving her diner van with a dented bumper and a thermos of soup on the passenger seat because she believed all investigations should have refreshments. She wore a honey-brown sweater under her coat, her red-brown curls tied back with a plaid scarf. Her cheeks were flushed from the diner kitchen and the cold, and her hands smelled faintly of bread. Ruth Calder arrived behind her in a state police SUV, boots already wet with slush, expression unreadable. Captain Nora Whitcomb came last. Nora did not look like a woman who hurried for weather or men. She stepped from her vehicle in a long, dark navy coat, silver-gray hair cut short, glasses hanging from a thin chain around her neck. Her face was narrow, composed, and severe without being cruel. She carried a red folder under one arm, and when she looked at St. Agnes, she did not seem impressed by its age, beauty, or sadness. She seemed interested only in whether it could tell the truth. "Mrs. Crane," Nora said, approaching Mabel with a nod that was neither pity nor softness. "I'm Captain Whitcomb. Trooper Calder has briefed me." Mabel studied her. "You look like a woman who has made liars sweat, only when they insist." "Good." Nora's mouth moved by perhaps half an inch. It was the closest thing to a smile she had offered the morning. St. Agnes stood beneath the sun like a memory someone had tried to preserve. Snow clung to its steep roof. The old bell rope hung motionless now, stiff with frost. Along the stone fence, ice had melted and refrozen in clear ridges, catching the light so that every rough stone seemed edged with glass. The rear path where Warren had found Mabel had been marked off lightly by Ruth the day before, not with bright crime scene drama, but with small flags and photographs, enough to preserve the fragile order of what remained. Warren helped Mabel into a folding chair near the path. Bramble stood beside her, wearing the red-brown scarf and an expression that suggested he disapproved of folding chairs on principle. For a while, no one asked questions. That was Nora's decision. Warren could tell. She let Mabel sit in the place. Let the air speak first. Let the body recognize what the mind had not yet arranged. The wind moved softly around the chapel. Somewhere under the eaves, a metal wind chime clicked once, then again. Mabel's hand tightened on the edge of the chair. "There," she whispered. Ruth lifted her pen, but did not interrupt. Mabel closed her eyes. The chime was moving, faster that night. I remember thinking it sounded like spoons in a drawer. Tessa stood behind her, arms folded around herself. Guilt had made her quieter than Warren had ever seen her. Mabel breathed slowly. "I had the bag in my left hand," she said. "The canvas one. The green one with the tear near the handle. There were 3 blankets inside, 2 pairs of socks, a tin of crackers. I was going to leave them under the side porch." "For whom?" Nora asked. "Harold Finch, if he was there. Maybe Glenn Harrow. They don't always come inside when asked. Some men need to be invited 3 times and ignored once before they trust a door." Warren thought of Glenn asleep with Bramble's head on his boot. Mabel opened her eyes and looked toward the rear steps. "I heard the truck before I saw anyone." "What kind of truck?" Ruth asked. "Relief truck, the white one. I know the sound. It rattles when it idles, like a spoon in a teacup." Tessa's face tightened. Mabel continued. "Boxes were being moved. I remember that. I asked what they were doing." Her voice changed then. Not louder, smaller, but clearer. "He said I should let people with proper training handle distribution." Nora watched her closely. "Do you remember his voice?" "Yes." "Do you remember whose?" Mabel looked down at Bramble. The dog stood very still. "Owen Lark." The name fell gently. That made it worse. No thunder, no gasp. Just a name placed where it belonged. Mabel swallowed. "I told him people were cold now, not next season. He said I was making things difficult. I said difficulty was the Lord's way of keeping bureaucrats from becoming furniture." Tessa made a small sound that might have been a laugh if grief had not been sitting on it. "He walked past me," Mabel said. "I caught his sleeve. I shouldn't have. I know that. But he was leaving with boxes. I wanted him to stop long enough to be ashamed." Her hand moved to the arm of the chair, fingers curling. "He pulled away hard. I had 1 foot on the edge of the step. My boot slipped. I remember his button coming off. I remember Bramble barking. Not like a dog, like a church bell that had learned rage." Bramble lowered his head. Warren felt his own hands tighten inside his gloves. Mabel's voice thinned. "I hit the stone. The world went white, then gray. I could hear him breathing. Close. For a moment I thought he would help me." She looked toward the path where snow had once covered her body. He stood there. No one spoke. The old church, the winter sun, the gathered adults, the dog with the crooked ear, all of it, seemed to hold still around that sentence. A man standing over a fallen woman had only 2 choices. That was the cruelty of it. Not policy, not logistics, not donor relations. 2 choices. Help or leave. "He said," Mabel whispered. "Why couldn't you just stay home?" Tessa covered her mouth. Ruth's pen stopped moving for the first time. Nora removed her glasses very slowly and held them at her side. "And then?" Nora asked. Then Bramble came at him. Mabel reached down, touching the dog's ear. "Old fool. He bit the sleeve or the glove, I think." Owen cursed. I heard running. Then the truck. Then snow in my mouth. She closed her eyes. Then warmth. His warmth. Bramble lay down beside me. I kept telling him to go find shelter. He didn't listen. Men and dogs rarely do when they should. Warren looked away toward the fence. He had heard courage described in many polished ways. Duty, honor, sacrifice. Big words men carved into stone after the small, ugly moments were over. But maybe courage was simpler. A dog too old to win a fight, lying down anyway. Nora put her glasses back on. Mrs. Crane, I'm going to record a formal statement from you. We'll go slowly. If you need to stop, we stop. Mabel lifted her chin. I am old, Captain. Not decorative. Understood. Ruth matched the brass button to photographs of the Winter Relief Coordinator coat Owen had worn in several public postings. Nora did not declare it conclusive, but Warren saw the case taking shape. The button, the video at North Lantern, Owen's statements, Arthur's presence, Mabel's memory, Tessa's account, the missing supplies, not a single bolt of lightning, a rope, strand by strand. While Ruth and Nora worked, Tessa stood near the stone fence, staring at the ground. I should have listened, she said quietly. Warren joined her but did not answer too quickly. Tessa rubbed both hands over her sleeves, though the morning was not bitter now. She told me something was wrong. Mabel came into the diner with that notebook, and I don't know what I thought. That she was tired. That old people worry. That maybe I had soup to stir and bills to pay and couldn't carry one more trouble. Warren watched Mabel speaking to Nora, small and fierce in the folding chair. She paid my electric bill once, Tessa said. Did I tell you? Yes. She pretended it was a catering order. 12 jars of soup for an address that didn't exist. Tessa laughed once, wetly. I knew. She knew I knew. Neither of us said it. That was her kindness. It always left people their pride. Warren looked at the chapel wall. You're here now. That enough? No, she nodded, accepting the wound of that. But it's where enough starts, Warren said. Tessa looked at him then. You practice sounding like a sad fortune cookie, or does it come naturally? Military benefit. She almost smiled. Mabel called Warren over a few minutes later. Her blue notebook lay open on her lap. Since everyone is finally paying attention, she said, you may as well look at the part I was going to bring June before the weather tried to murder me. The notebook was not dramatic. That was what made it devastating. No secret codes, no hidden confession. Just names. Glenn Harrow Boots, size 11, refuses shelter unless approached by name. Harold Finch medication, left coat at bus stop. Naomi Bell sleeps in car behind laundromat, no ID, needs gloves. 2 men near St. Agnes check side porch before storm. Dates followed. Times, notes on deliveries that never arrived. Boxes she had seen loaded but not distributed. Names of volunteers. Weather conditions. A record made in pencil by a woman no one had authorized to care that precisely. Warren turned the pages slowly. He had known battle plans with less attention to human need. Mabel watched him read. People disappear when paperwork decides not to see them. Warren said nothing. Because there it was, the thing he had missed, even while lifting, fixing, driving, rescuing. He had helped the town, yes, but Mabel had known the forgotten by name, not as a category, not as a problem. As people with cold hands, bad knees, missing medicine, and pride enough to refuse charity badly offered, he had thought protection meant standing between harm and the vulnerable when the harm arrived. Mabel had spent years arriving first. The shame that moved through him was quiet, but it did not spare him. Bramble leaned against Mabel's chair, tired from the outing. Warren looked at the old shepherd and understood something he had resisted since the night of the storm. The dog had not saved Mabel because she belonged to him. He had saved her because she had taught him what belonging felt like. Nora closed her red folder just after noon. I have enough to seek a search warrant for the relief warehouse and the lodge annex, she said. I can't promise timing, but I can move. Mabel looked satisfied. Good. Search thoroughly. Men like Owen hide sin in alphabetical order. Ruth's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression changed. What? Warren asked. Ruth looked at Nora first. Owen just announced an emergency town meeting for tonight. Says he wants to address dangerous rumors undermining post-storm unity. Tessa swore softly. Mabel leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Of course he did. Nora took the phone, read the announcement, and handed it back. Her face had gone still in a way Warren recognized from people preparing for a fight they did not intend to enjoy. He's moving first, Ruth said. No, Nora replied. He's moving publicly. Warren looked toward the chapel, then the clean white town beyond it. Owen would not run into the woods. He would not hide in some dark shed. Men like Owen preferred light if they could control where it fell. He would stand beneath the warm lamps of the town hall, speak in complete sentences, praise unity, wound truth with politeness, and dare decent people to look rude by doubting him. Bramble stood slowly beside Mabel's chair. The old dog faced the road back toward town. Warren rested one hand on his head. All right, he said. The next battle would not be in the storm. It would be in a room full of neighbors, under yellow lights, where lies wore clean coats and shook hands. And this time, Mabel Crane would not be lying in the snow while someone else told the story. By evening, the snow had begun again. Not a storm this time, nothing violent. It drifted softly through the amber streetlights of Lake Wren, gentle enough to look innocent, steady enough to remind everyone that winter was never truly finished with them. The town hall glowed at the center of Maple Street like a lantern set down in a white field. People came in heavy coats, boots crusted with salt, shoulders hunched against the cold. They came because Owen Lark had asked them to, or because Mabel Crane had been hurt, or because the word rumor had traveled through town faster than any official notice, knocking on doors, leaning over diner counters, moving from the bakery to the pharmacy to the shelter with the sly speed of a fox under fences. Inside the hall, the heat was too high and still not enough. Wet coats steamed on chairbacks. The floor shone with melted snow. Folding chairs filled in uneven rows beneath strings of old winter festival lights that June Bellamy had refused to take down in January because, as she said, if the sun won't do its job, I'll hire bulbs. Tonight, those yellow bulbs made the room look warmer than it felt. The first row had been left open for Mabel. Warren brought her in through the side door with Ruth Calder walking beside them and Captain Nora Whitcomb following with a red folder tucked under one arm. Mabel sat in a borrowed wheelchair, wrapped in a cream coat and a gray blanket, her bruised shoulder hidden but not erased. Her chin was high. On her lap rested the pale blue notebook. Bramble walked beside her chair, slowly, proudly. The old German shepherd wore Mabel's red-brown scarf around his neck and a simple olive-gray warming vest Dr. Helen had insisted on. One ear stood alert, the other tipped at the end. His black and gold fur still looked rough in places, but his eyes were clear. He moved with the careful dignity of an old king entering court after surviving an assassination attempt and finding the court badly managed. Several people whispered when they saw him. Glenn Harrow, seated near the aisle in a donated coat, too large for his thin shoulders, straightened as Bramble passed. The dog paused only long enough to press his muzzle briefly against Glenn's knee. Glenn's hand trembled when he touched the dog's head, but this time the tremor looked less lonely. Warren noticed. So did Mabel. She said nothing, which from her was almost ceremonial. June stood near the stage, her red brick coat thrown over one arm, her face tight with a kind of anger that had run out of easy targets. She had spent the afternoon reviewing papers, searching her own memory, and discovering all the places where trust had been used as a hiding place. That kind of discovery did not leave a person clean. "You all right?" Warren asked her quietly. "No," June said, "but I'm punctual. That helps?" "No, but it annoys people who deserve annoyance." Before Warren could answer, the murmuring shifted. Owen Lark stepped onto the small stage. He had chosen his clothes carefully, not too formal, not too casual. A dark wool coat over a navy blazer, black turtleneck, polished boots. The brass buttons on his coat gleamed beneath the lights, though Warren noticed one had been replaced. Its shine was newer, brighter, almost proud of not knowing what the old one had witnessed. Owen stood behind the podium, with both hands resting lightly on either side. His face carried the correct amount of concern. His voice, when he began, was calm enough to make panic seem childish. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he said. "I know everyone is tired. This storm tested our town in ways no one wanted, and I want to begin by thanking every volunteer, every donor, every neighbor who opened a door, lifted a shovel, or carried a box." A few heads nodded. Owen let gratitude settle before he used it. "Unfortunately," he continued, "in the aftermath of any crisis, confusion can spread faster than facts. People are frightened. They hear fragments. They interpret difficult decisions as wrongdoing. And sometimes, good people, tired people, begin to look at one another with suspicion." Warren stood near the wall, arms folded, saying nothing. Bramble lay beside Mabel's wheelchair, but his head remained up. Owen looked across the room, eyes moving from face to face, never resting too long on anyone who might challenge him. "I called this meeting because Lake Wren cannot afford division. Not now. We cannot let rumor undermine the work so many have done. Relief distribution is complex. Weather changes routes. Inventory must be shifted. Some decisions look harsh from the outside, but leadership requires—" "Leadership?" June said from below the stage. The room turned. Owen gave her a patient smile. "Yes, June, leadership." June's own smile could have stripped paint from a fence. "Just checking. Thought maybe we'd change the meaning while I was sorting blankets you misplaced." A few people murmured. Someone near the back coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Owen did not lose composure. "I understand your frustration," he said, "but this is exactly why we need process over emotion." Warren stepped forward then. Not onto the stage. He did not need height. He placed a manila folder on the front table where Nora had told him to. The sound was small. The room felt it anyway. Owen looked down at the folder. Warren opened it and laid out the photographs one by one. The relief truck leaving the warehouse at dawn. The license plate, Arthur Vale, carrying boxes. The storage annex at North Lantern Lodge, blankets with Lake Wren donation labels stacked under the lodge awning. Portable heaters, thermal socks, winter boots. No speech, no accusation, just images. The kind that did not care how polished a man's voice was. Owen's face did not collapse. That would have been too honest. It tightened by degrees, like a door closing softly. "These are being reviewed by state police," Nora said from the side of the room. Her voice was quiet, but the hall heard every word. "No one here is being asked to act as a court, but this community is entitled to understand why emergency relief supplies were diverted from the shelter." Owen turned toward her. "Captain Whitcomb, surely you understand temporary reassignment." "I understand the phrase," Nora said. "I'm waiting to see if it survives evidence." The first real crack in Owen's confidence came not from Warren, nor June, nor Nora. It came from Arthur Vale. He stood near the back wall, half hidden between two men in work jackets. Warren had not noticed him enter. Arthur wore the same brown knit cap from the lodge, twisting it now in both hands. His face looked gray under the yellow lights. Owen saw him too. "Arthur," Owen said softly. It sounded like a warning disguised as greeting. Arthur swallowed. For a moment, he seemed likely to sit down again and let his fear continue managing his life. His eyes moved toward the door, toward Owen, toward the photographs, then, finally, toward Mabel. She sat in the first row, small and pale, with Bramble's head resting near the wheel of her chair. Arthur's shoulders dropped. "I drove the truck," he said. The room went still. Owen's face sharpened. "Arthur, this is not the place to—" "I drove it," Arthur repeated, louder this time. His voice shook, but it did not stop. "To North Lantern, twice. Once before the storm, once after. Mr. Lark told me the supplies were being held for donors and stranded guests, just temporary, just until paperwork caught up. Owen stepped away from the podium. That is a gross mischaracterization. Arthur looked at him then, and something like anger flickered beneath the fear. You told me nobody at the shelter would miss a few boxes because they were used to doing without. The words landed hard. Someone in the second row gasped. Glen Harrow looked down at his hands. Arthur kept going, as if stopping now would drown him. The night Mrs. Crane got hurt, Mr. Lark came back to the warehouse with his sleeve torn. He was breathing hard. I asked what happened. He said an old woman had made a scene and slipped. He said if anyone asked, we'd been at the warehouse all evening. Owen's voice turned cold. You're confused. No, Arthur said. I was scared. There's a difference. That was when Mabel lifted her hand. She did not lift it high. She did not need to. The room turned toward her with a respect that had arrived late, but arrived kneeling. Warren moved as if to help, but she gave him a look that stopped him where he stood. Bramble rose slowly beside her chair. Mabel placed the blue notebook on her lap and opened it. I was not making a scene, she said. Her voice was thin, but the room leaned toward it. I was carrying blankets. No one moved. I have been called many things in this town. Nosy, difficult, unreasonable. Once, by a man who shall remain nameless because his wife still makes excellent apple cake, a menace with knitting needles. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the hall, but I was not confused. She turned a page. I wrote names because paperwork did not. Glen Harrow, Harold Finch, Naomi Bell, 2 men who sleep behind St. Agnes when they think kindness comes with too many questions. People who are very real, even when forms find them inconvenient. Glen lowered his head. Mabel looked at Owen. When I lay in the snow, I did not think about your donors, Mr. Lark. I did not think about your schedules or your speeches. I thought about how cold the ground was. I thought about how strange it is that a person can live 76 years and still be surprised by how quickly another person can walk away. Owen's mouth opened, but no words came. Mabel's hand moved to Bramble's head, and then this dog stayed. The hall fell into a silence deeper than embarrassment. Bramble stood beside her chair, old and uneven, and wrapped in a scarf that had once belonged to the woman he had guarded. He did not look noble in the polished way statues did. He looked tired, real, breakable. That made his presence harder to dismiss. He had no title, Mabel said. No budget, no key to the warehouse, no donor list, no committee badge. He had an old body, a bad leg, and warmth he could not afford to spare, and he spent it on me. Her voice trembled then, but it did not break. If a stray dog knows that cold people should not be left outside, I wonder what excuse remains for the rest of us. No one clapped. Clapping would have cheapened it. Instead, something more difficult happened. A man from the hardware store stood near the middle aisle, red-faced and heavyset, cap crushed between both hands. I saw the truck head north, he said, before the storm. Thought it was odd. Figured someone knew better than me. A woman who ran the laundromat spoke next, not looking at Mabel. She told me the lists were missing people. I said she worried too much. Near the back, a younger volunteer lifted his hand halfway. I helped unload boxes at the warehouse. I didn't ask where they went after. I just didn't ask. One confession did not cleanse a room, but it changed the air. The town began to understand the thing Warren had seen forming for days. Owen had done wrong, yes, but he had not built the road alone. Politeness had paved it. Convenience had plowed it. Everyone who chose not to ask had cleared a little snow from his path. Owen gathered himself. It was impressive in its way. Some men, cornered by truth, became animals. Owen became smoother. My attorney will address these reckless statements, he said. This meeting has become a spectacle. I won't legitimize mob judgment. He stepped down from the stage. No one blocked him at first. Then Bramble moved. Not fast. He could not move fast. That was what made it terrible. The old dog rose from beside Mabel's chair and limped into the aisle, each step deliberate. His claws clicked softly against the wooden floor. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lunge. He simply placed himself between Owen and the door. The scarf around his neck shifted as he breathed. His body trembled from age and effort. His amber eyes fixed on Owen with a steadiness older than language. For a second, Warren wanted to call him back. Then he did not. Owen stopped. The room stopped with him. Here was the whole story, stripped of speeches, the man who had walked away and the dog who had stayed. Owen looked past Bramble toward Warren. "Control your animal." Warren's voice was quiet. "He is." The words moved through the hall like a match in dry grass. Captain Nora Whitcomb stepped forward and gave Ruth the smallest nod. Ruth and another state trooper moved into the aisle. Ruth's hand did not touch her weapon. It did not need to. Her voice was low, formal, and clear. "Owen Lark, you are being detained pending investigation into reckless endangerment of an elderly person, falsification of emergency relief records, misappropriation of donated supplies, obstruction of emergency services, and related charges." Owen's face lost color at last. "This is absurd." Nora removed her glasses slowly. "You may want to save that word for counsel." Ruth turned him gently, but firmly. The handcuffs were not dramatic. Their click was. No one cheered. That mattered. A cheer would have allowed the town to pretend this was over because one man had been led away. Instead, people watched in a silence that felt heavier and more honest. Owen passed Bramble without looking down. Bramble did not move until Owen was through the door. Then the old dog sat, suddenly, completely, as if his bones had filed a complaint and won. Mabel let out a breath that might have been a laugh and might have been a sob. Warren went to the dog and rested one hand lightly on his back. "Show off," he murmured. Bramble leaned against his leg. June Bellamy climbed onto the stage after Owen was gone. For the first time Warren could remember, June looked uncertain under public attention. Not frightened, never that, but stripped of the comfortable armor of being useful. She held no clipboard. That alone made several people nervous. "I owe this town an apology," she said. The hall stirred. June raised her hand. "No, don't make it easy. I trusted a system because it saved me time. I trusted Owen with inventory because I was busy with people. That sounds noble. It wasn't enough." Her voice grew rough. "Starting tomorrow, the relief warehouse opens its records to public review. Every supply run gets 2 signatures, one from transport and one from shelter intake. No donation leaves without a destination anyone can check. And Mrs. Crane, if she is willing, will oversee the list of people who don't fit neatly on forms." Mabel looked up sharply. "I am injured, not unemployed," she said. June's eyes watered despite herself. "That a yes?" "It is a complaint with conditions." "I'll take it." Bramble huffed. The sound was small, dusty, and deeply judgmental. A few people laughed then, not because the matter was light, because they needed proof that something living remained in the room after truth had done its cutting. Warren stood beside Mabel and Bramble while snow tapped softly against the hall windows. Outside, winter kept falling, white and beautiful and indifferent. Inside, Lake Wren sat with its shame, its anger, and the first rough tools of repair. It was not redemption, not yet. But it was the first honest meeting the town had held in a long time. And that, Warren thought, was warmer than a speech. Lake Wren did not become noble overnight. That was important. No bell rang over the frozen lake. No choir appeared on the town hall steps to announce that people had learned their lesson and would now behave beautifully until spring. The next morning, somebody still parked badly outside the pharmacy. A pipe burst under the laundromat. 2 volunteers argued over whether donated coats should be sorted by size or color, and June Bellamy nearly declared martial law over a stack of mismatched gloves. The town remained human, but something had shifted. Not loudly, Not like thunder. More like an old door that had been swollen shut for years, finally giving way by one quiet inch. The relief warehouse opened its books on Tuesday morning. June stood at the entrance with a clipboard, a thermos of coffee, and the expression of a woman prepared to fight either corruption or poor handwriting, whichever showed itself first. Every box was counted, every heater tested, every blanket marked by destination. 2 signatures were required for each load now, one from transport, one from shelter intake. June had taped a handwritten sign above the supply desk that read, "If you can't explain where it went, it doesn't go." Someone had added beneath it in smaller letters, "June sees all." June left it there. North Lantern Lodge returned the supplies under the supervision of state police. Clive Mercer, pale and chastened, also donated money to the emergency fund. He called it a gesture of support. Captain Nora Whitcomb called it cooperation pending further review. Tessa Monroe called it rich man soup seasoning and cashed the check before anyone could rename it. Owen Lark's name disappeared from flyers, notice boards, and polite conversations. Not because the town forgot him, because people were learning the difference between silence and forgetting. Arthur Vale came to the shelter 3 days after the meeting. He entered with his brown knit cap crushed in both hands, looking as if he expected every person in the room to throw something at him. No one did. That almost seemed worse for him. June watched him from the supply table. "You here to apologize, confess, or move boxes?" Arthur swallowed. "All 3, if you'll let me." June stared at him long enough to make 2 nearby volunteers discover urgent business elsewhere. Then she pointed to a stack of firewood by the door. "Start with boxes. We'll see if apology has muscle." Arthur nodded. He worked the rest of the day without removing his coat, hauling supplies, sweeping slush, loading blankets into the correct trucks under the eyes of people he had disappointed. He did not ask to be forgiven. That, Warren thought, was the first useful thing he had done. By the end of the week, Arthur was driving relief routes without pay. He checked names twice. He carried heavy boxes up icy steps. He came back quiet every night, shoulders sore and face red from cold. Once, Warren saw him kneel beside Glenn Harrow to tighten the laces on a pair of donated boots. Glenn looked down at him and said, "You any good with knots?" Arthur paused. "Trying to be." Glenn grunted. "Fine, start with mine." That was as close to absolution as Lake Wren offered in winter. Tessa's diner became an unofficial second shelter. Every morning, its windows glowed before sunrise. Steam fogged the glass. The place smelled of bread, soup, coffee, onions, and the kind of stubborn hope that could survive under bad fluorescent lights. Tessa moved behind the counter with her hair tied in a plaid scarf, a ladle in one hand like a royal scepter. Glenn helped wipe tables now, though he complained constantly. "This coffee tastes like boot water that found religion," he told her one morning. Tessa refilled his cup. "If you're alive enough to insult it, it's working." He took a sip. Barely. Then drank 2. Bramble liked the diner. Not because of the scraps, though he accepted them with solemn reluctance, as if doing Tessa a favor. He liked the low voices, the warm floor near the radiator, and the people who came in cold and left slightly less folded in on themselves. He had a gift for finding the quietest person in a room. He would cross to them slowly, lower himself with an old dog's groan, and place his chin near their boot. No command, no performance, just presence. Warren watched this happen more than once and never knew what to do with the ache it left in him. Mabel Crane returned to her house behind the old laundromat after Dr. Voss allowed it, and Dr. Helen Marlowe threatened to report her for criminal impatience if she tried sooner. The house was small, white-sided, with blue shutters and a porch that had begun slanting like a tired shoulder. Before the storm, people had walked past it with the vague affection towns reserved for old ladies who leave jars on stoops. Afterward, they began stopping. The hardware store owner repaired her porch rail. 2 women from the shelter shoveled her walk. Arthur delivered dry firewood and stacked it without being asked. June organized a rotating check-in list, then lied to Mabel's face by calling it community maintenance scheduling. Mabel narrowed her eyes. That is a fancy name for pity. June shook her head. No, pity brings casseroles. This has forms. Forms make it worse. Too bad. You're on the committee. I am the victim. Temporarily. Committees are forever. Mabel complained, which meant she accepted. She also returned to her notebook. Only now the notebook had become official enough to annoy her. June gave her a sturdier binder with labeled tabs. Ruth provided waterproof pens. Tessa added a front pocket for diner vouchers. Mabel grumbled that everyone was ruining the humble dignity of pencil, then spent 2 hours rewriting names in careful columns. People who needed boots. People who needed medication. People who would not enter the shelter unless approached by someone they trusted. People sleeping in cars. People too proud to ask. People too ashamed to be found. Warren stopped by most evenings after finishing repairs or supply runs. Sometimes he brought wood. Sometimes groceries. Sometimes nothing at all except Bramble, who insisted on checking Mabel's porch as if it were a military outpost with poor discipline. Dr. Helen Marlowe continued to care for Bramble. She came to Warren's cabin twice that week, broad hands gentle on the old shepherd's legs, blunt voice softening only when she thought no one heard. He needs rest, she told Warren. Regular food, warmth, short walks, no stress. Bramble stood at the window, watching a squirrel commit trespass on the porch rail. No stress, Warren repeated. Helen followed his gaze. Tell him the squirrel has legal counsel. Bramble growled at the squirrel. Helen sighed. Hopeless. Warren tried to keep Bramble quiet. For half a day, it worked. Then Bramble appointed himself, inspector of the porch, the woodpile, the truck tires, the road, Mabel's steps, Glenn's boots, the shelter entrance, Tessa's kitchen door, and one suspicious snowman outside the bakery. The snowman, in fairness, had button eyes. Weeks passed in small repairs. That was how healing moved in Lake Wren. Not in speeches, but in practical indignities. A fixed hinge. A delivered prescription. A cot moved away from a draft. Soup in a paper bowl. Boots that fit. A man learning to ask, who hasn't come in yet? Warren's cabin changed before he admitted it. At first, the changes were temporary. A dog bowl near the stove, extra towels by the door, a folded blanket beside the couch, because Bramble preferred that spot after patrols. Then came a bag of senior dog food, a brush, medicine from Helen, a hook by the door for Mabel's red-brown scarf when Bramble was not wearing it. The cabin began to smell less like one man's retreat and more like a place life had started tracking snow into. Warren pretended not to notice. Bramble did not allow that lie to mature. Every time Warren returned from town, the old shepherd would be waiting by the door, not wagging wildly, not begging, just standing there with his one straight ear and one tipped ear, as if Warren's arrival had been expected by all sensible creatures and was still somehow behind schedule. If Warren was late, Bramble would refuse to finish his food until he came in. That's manipulation, Warren told him one evening. Bramble chewed slowly, eyes on him. Effective manipulation, Warren admitted. One night, after a long supply run to an outlying farm road, Warren brought Mabel a stack of updated route sheets. She was at his cabin that evening because Tessa had driven her over for dinner and then abandoned her there under the excuse of checking the soup stock, which fooled no one. Mabel sat near the fire, Bramble asleep between her chair and Warren's boots. The dog's paws twitched in dreams. His silver muzzle rested on the edge of the old quilt. The faint scar around his neck showed where the fur parted. Mabel watched Warren watching him. You should make it official, she said. Warren looked up from the route sheets. Make what official? She gave him the look she reserved for men being deliberately slow. The dog. He's staying until he's stronger. What does that mean? It means lies sound worse when said near a fireplace. Warren looked back at Bramble. The old dog slept on, unaware or pretending well. "He was yours first," Warren said. Mabel's face softened. "No, I fed him. He walked me home. That is not the same as belonging." She paused. "I think he chose you." Warren's jaw tightened. Outside, the wind moved lightly through the spruce trees. Snow slid from the roof in a soft hush. "I had a dog once," he said. Mabel did not move. She understood, perhaps, that some doors opened only if no one reached for the handle too quickly. "Military working dog," Warren continued. "Shepherd, different color, younger. Smarter than half the men in my unit and kinder than the other half deserved." Bramble's ear flicked in sleep. Warren stared at the fire. "He got me through a bad year, then I had to get through losing him." Mabel's voice was gentle, which for her meant it did not sharpen the wound. "And you decided not to owe your heart to anything with a shorter life than yours?" Warren said nothing. "That's practical," she said. He looked at her. "It's also cowardly, but many practical things are." He almost laughed. It came out more like a breath. Mabel leaned forward and rested one hand on Bramble's side. "Mr. Pike, grief is a poor landlord. It charges too much rent for rooms you don't even live in anymore." The fire cracked softly. Warren looked at the old shepherd, at the rough coat, the bad leg, the scarf hook by the door, the bowl near the stove, the way his cabin seemed to hold its breath when Bramble dreamed too hard. "What if I lose him?" Warren asked. Mabel stroked Bramble's fur. "Then you will have loved him properly." That was the terrible thing about simple answers. They left a man nowhere to hide. The next afternoon, Warren drove to the hardware store and had a small brass tag engraved Bramble Pike. The clerk asked if he wanted a phone number on the back. Warren paused, then gave it. When he clipped the tag to Bramble's new brown leather collar, the old dog stood very still. The tag flashed once in the firelight. "Bramble Pike," Warren said. "Sounds like an old man who files complaints about improper snow shoveling." Mabel, seated on the couch with tea, nodded approvingly. "He has the temperament." Bramble wagged his tail once. Slowly, with profound legal authority. The final morning came soft and bright. Snow fell lightly over Lake Wren, not enough to threaten, just enough to make the world look newly considered. The sky was pale blue behind thin clouds. The frozen lake reflected a muted glow. Smoke lifted from chimneys in peaceful lines. Along Maple Street, people cleared steps, opened shops, carried supplies, waved without making too much ceremony of it. Warren, Mabel, and Bramble went to St. Agnes together. Mabel walked with a cane now, slowly but stubbornly. Warren kept one hand near her elbow without touching, unless needed. Bramble walked on her other side, wearing his vest and red-brown scarf, the brass tag at his collar bright against old fur. They did not go to the rear path first. There had been enough remembering. Instead, they went to the side porch, where Mabel had once meant to leave blankets in secret. Tessa had prepared a wicker basket lined with oilcloth. Inside were folded wool blankets, socks, hand warmers, and small packets of crackers. On the front, in Tessa's bold handwriting, a sign read, "Take one. Leave warmth if you can." Mabel read it and sniffed. She spelled warmth correctly. Miracles continue. Warren hung the basket from a sturdy hook beneath the porch roof. Then he stepped back. For a moment, the three of them stood beneath the old chapel's eaves while snow drifted beyond the stone fence. The bell rope hung still. The place no longer looked like a wound to Warren. Not healed. Wounds that deep did not vanish because people wanted a pretty ending, but it looked tended. That mattered. Mabel tucked one blanket more neatly into the basket. Bramble sneezed. Snow flew from his muzzle in a small white burst. Mabel laughed, bright and sudden. Warren looked down at the dog. Very majestic. Bramble raised his head, amber eyes calm beneath the falling snow, and gave him the kind of look kings gave jesters they had chosen not to execute. Warren smiled. Not almost. Fully. Across town, the community hall doors opened, June's voice carried faintly on the cold air, scolding someone about inventory labels. Tessa's diner windows glowed gold. Glenn Harrow shuffled along the sidewalk, carrying a box of napkins, like a man entrusted with sacred relics. Arthur Vale backed a relief truck carefully into place, while Ruth Calder watched him with the merciless patience of the law. Lake Wren was still flawed, still cold, still capable of forgetting if it did not practice remembering. But Warren no longer saw his cabin as a place to hide from the world. He saw it now as a door, a fire, a porch with room enough for two shadows at dusk. One man, one old dog, standing watch not because they had to save everyone, but because someone might come by cold and need to be seen. He rested his hand on Bramble's head. The dog leaned into him, warm and real. Warren thought of all the wars men named, and all the smaller wars no one put on monuments. Against indifference, against loneliness, against the habit of walking past someone in the snow. Coming home, he understood at last, was not the end of service. Sometimes it was the first honest form of it. And kindness was not a speech, nor a photograph, nor a promise pinned to a board. Kindness was staying when the weather turned. It was a widow carrying blankets through a storm. It was a stray dog spending his warmth on someone who had once fed him scraps. It was an old soldier opening his door again, though love had cost him before. Above them, snow fell gently over St. Agnes, over the lake, over the town learning its own name anew, and Bramble Pike, king of the porch, judge of snowmen, guardian of widows and difficult men, stood beside Warren as if he had belonged there all along. Sometimes kindness does not arrive with a speech, a title, or a perfect plan. Sometimes it arrives as an old woman carrying blankets through the snow, a tired dog refusing to leave her side, or a quiet man finally opening his door again. This story reminds us that God's grace often moves through small acts of courage. A warm meal, a checked doorway, a name remembered, a hand offered before someone has to ask. In a cold world, staying beside someone can become a miracle. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who in your life has been a quiet light in the storm. And if you'd like more stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel. May peace find your home. May kindness guide your steps, and may you never forget the people waiting to be seen.